Educated guess. Wait, did you say that on the back row? You're older than she is. How did you know that? So it's an educated guess. Now, brethren, please understand, it's not a guess. I guess pigs can fly. Well, there's not much education behind that guess, okay? Because I've never observed a pig fly. But Sir Isaac Newton, according to the story, observed an apple fall. And he started to think about it. He started to hypothesize about it, that he's noticed that all apples seem to fall. And when he's been in other towns, apples seem to fall. And when he's been in other countries, apples seem to fall. And he's never known of an apple to fall up, okay? But he's always known apples to fall down. So once he formed his hypothesis, what happens next? That's it. You've got to test it. You've got to experiment with it. So in other words, what does he do? He goes to apple trees all over the place and he drops to see if they fall down. He might even go to some orange trees and drops and see if they fall down. He might take his kids and drop them and see if they fall down. Whatever the case. But he's going to just start dropping things to see if, in fact, there is some kind of earthly pull to the center of the planet that pulls things down rather than sends them flying up in the air. He experiments, and he experiments, and he experiments. What happens if even one of those apples he drops goes flying into the sky? This process, this particular method is over because it has not demonstrated itself to be true every time. Only, and I've got it up there, where it requires 100% support, only if and only if 100% of the time every apple that Sir Isaac Newton dropped fell down, could he then move to the third step. But that was only if everything fell down. Okay? So what's my next step? Theory. That's exactly right. You form a theory. Now, what is a theory? A theory is a hypothesis that has been proven thus far 100% of the time. So what do you do with a theory? Yeah, you got to test it. It's more experimentation. Except now it's not just Sir Isaac Newton, dropping apples. I'm dropping apples. We got a guy in Little Rabbit, Australia dropping apples. We got some guy at the Arctic and the Antarctic dropping apples. They're frozen apples, but they're dropping them nonetheless. Everybody's dropping apples. Everybody's dropping oranges. Everybody's dropping their children. Whatever the case may be, they're dropping these things to see if they all fall down. If and only if 100% of the time, with 100% of the people, do all of the apples fall down, then and only then can I move to the next step. But if that guy in Little Rabbit, Australia, drops an apple and it flies up into the sky, what happens? One of two things. I either go completely back to the beginning of the drawing board, or I, at the very least, go back to my educated guess, to my hypothesis, and I reformulate my conclusion. And then I start experimenting, and if it's proven 100% of the time, then we theorize, and everybody starts experimenting and dropping apples. And if everybody, everywhere, all of the time, finds their apples falling down, then and only then can I go to the next step. What's that? The law. You ever heard of the law of gravity? You know why the law of gravity exists? Because nobody's ever dropped anything that fell up. Now, if you take a helium balloon and drop it, what happens? Well, it would rise, but that's not an aspect of gravity. That's an aspect of the gas that's in the balloon. Take the gas out of the balloon, what happens to the balloon? Falls down, okay? Airplanes. Do airplanes fly up? Do rocket ships blast off? Yeah. but they are working with gravity, against gravity. There are other principles in play there. But take the gas out of the rocket ship. What happens to the rocket? Take the wings off the airplane mid-flight. What happens to the plane? Yeah, it's going down, okay? Because the law of gravity exists. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? This is why we study some of these things. Because are you aware that in the scientific community, there are laws that they believe exist, that they have proven over and over again, that actually contradict atheistic evolution? Because I want you guys to understand something. Let's see, I don't have a laser on this, do I? That's all right. I want you to look at that board for just a second. I want you to consider this. You realize that evolution, and when I say evolution, I am talking about atheistic evolution. There is no God, and everything blew into existence out of nothing, and over billions of years, a one-celled organism turned into a human being. That does take a lot of faith. And by the way, it takes more faith than our faith in the Bible. Because we actually have evidence and eyewitness testimony. They don't. But when I talk about atheistic evolution, you understand we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. Evolution is considered by many in the scientific community to be a law. It's called a theory, when it's not even a hypothesis. Why? Because so much of it has never, ever, even once been observed. Okay? Now, is that too hard for us to understand? No. But here's what's interesting. Anybody ever heard of the law of biogenesis? What does bio, the prefix bio, mean? Life. Okay? Genesis, creation or beginning. Okay? So this is the law of the beginning of life. And you know what the law, the scientific law, this is not a biblical point. This is what atheists in the scientific community have agreed. They have established that the law of biogenesis states that there is no such thing as life coming from lifelessness. Why? They've never observed it. They have never observed dead tissue, lifeless material, give rise to life. What is the basic principle of evolution? Biogenesis. They state that somewhere, sometime, millions and billions of years ago, this lifeless pool of goo, proteins, protoplasm, suddenly created the first one-celled organism. Here's the problem. The whole basis of evolution has already been disproven by their own science, by their own Bible. Because if you ask them, when did it happen? Well, their answer is, well, it must have happened. We've got life. No, that's not a scientific answer. Okay? You may not want to conclude God created the heavens and the earth, but you cannot conclude that life comes from lifelessness, because your own science has observed nothing like that, has hypothesized, theorized, and tested to the point that you have a law stating that can't happen. Would that be helpful in a conversation? To at least disprove the origin of life according to atheistic evolution. Now, they may not believe that it's God, but at some point in time, you might want to ask them, then where do you think it all came from? And in the absence of their answer, you might be able to pose a possible solution. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Anybody ever heard of the laws of thermodynamics? There are multiple laws of thermodynamics. One of the laws states that you cannot create or destroy energy that the same amount exists in the universe. The problem is that evolution states that everything's ticking down, that everything's changing, that you're losing. And the problem is their own law says that can't happen. In fact, one of their laws, I believe it's the third law, if I'm correct, one of their laws states that you cannot have matter or energy come from non-matter or energy. In other words, you cannot have something exist out of nothing. Now you understand that the scientific method, that their scientific process has observed and hypothesized and theorized and tested the stew out of this all the way up to the point that they have established this to be a law. There is no such thing as something coming into existence from nothing. Anybody ever heard of the Big Bang? The basis of evolution. The basis of evolution says that everything blew into existence out of nothing. Now, if you press them and say, well, if it blew out of existence into nothing, then what was there to exist? Well, they will say, well, there were these gases. Where did the gases come from? Bigger gases, I don't know. But the point is, where did it all come from? And their explanation to everything that exists in our universe today is that something blew into existence out of nothing. The problem with that is it defies their Bible. It defies their laws. Are there laws in the Bible for us? Are you supposed to go out and kill people? Are you supposed to steal? Are you supposed to commit adultery? Do we, if we're doing our jobs as Christians, do we live by these laws? Absolutely, because we respect not only the law, we respect the lawgiver. Their lawgiver is the scientific method. Their process, these laws that have come about due to their science. And their science says the Big Bang can't possibly have existed, because we have never seen something come into existence out of nothing. She said she finds it ironic that they say matter comes from matter, or that it came out of nothing. But gases are matter, by the way. They are substance that may be in a gaseous form, but it's still matter nonetheless. And so somebody comes along and says, well, I guess that's true. Our laws state that you can't have everything blow into existence out of nothing. So the next question I'm going to ask that person, I'm going to say, then where do you think everything came from? And their answer is, I don't know. And I'm going to sit here and go, well, let me pose a possible alternative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You understand what I'm talking about learning to use other Bibles so that you can help? Anybody happen to know what Alma chapter 7 verse 10 reads? Yeah. Who knows what Alma chapter 7 is? You are correct. Man, you're good. You're good. Alma chapter 7 and verse 10, out of the Mormon Bible that they claim comes from God, gives the birthplace of Jesus. And it says very clearly that he was born in Jerusalem. Except there's a problem with that. The Bible says he was born where? Bethlehem. So, they can't both be right. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are two different places. Jerusalem's big, Bethlehem's little. They're near each other, but they're not the same place. So that being the case, either they're both wrong or at least one of them's wrong. I personally believe the Bible to be correct. I believe the Bible to be the inspired Word of God. But if I'm going to teach someone that there's a difference here, that there's a contradiction here, I have to know enough about that Bible to show them the difference so that they can think and they can formulate a conclusion themselves. It is not my job to brainwash. Whenever I get up here on a Sunday or I'm standing here during a Bible study here or Wednesday or whatever, it is not my job to convince you to believe what I think. It is my job to teach and preach and help people learn how to think for themselves so that they can open up God's Word, which is easily understood, and they can learn it for themselves. That's where real faith comes from. Cults come from the other way. When you try to rob someone of their ability to think, you now have a cult. But in Christianity, we want people to think. We encourage people to think. And we encourage them to use the Bible to help them to understand. But not everybody out there does that. You know, the Mormons use the Bible, but they use the Book of Mormon. They use the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, the book called the Pearl of Great Price. They've got other things that they believe are from God. I've got a Bible that says nothing else is coming. That back in the first century, everything pertaining to life and godliness was given to us. Not anything else. There's nothing else coming down the pipe. What about when I deal with Seventh-day Adventists? I need to understand that although their conclusion may be inaccurate, I've got to understand that when they use that word commandment, to them it means 10 commandments. To them it means the fourth commandment. And therefore, every time they see in the New Testament, we ought to obey the commandments of God, to them that means we ought to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That may be an inaccurate interpretation of the text, but it's theirs. And I can argue with them till I'm blue in the face that we are not to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy under the law of Christ today. But as long as their understanding is different from the Bible's, but they believe their understanding to be from the Bible, they're never going to change. That's why we need to learn how other people think. We need to learn how other people decide. We need to learn how other people figure these things out. Now, when it comes to evolution, so much of evolution has to do with their faith. And their faith is more about there is no God than evolution exists. This has happened for a long time. People who were big proponents of evolution 200 years ago, back in Charles Darwin's day, a lot of the people then, even like today, a lot of people who don't believe in God don't want to believe in God because somehow, some way, something has hurt them. They lost someone. They were killed. A baby passed in childbirth. Some terrible trauma to them. And they sit there and think, how could a loving God cause this to happen? First of all, they've asked the wrong question. And if we're there, maybe we can help them to understand the right answer. But as long as you go into every act of sin and death and suffering and that exists in the world, as long as you blame God, you're never going to come out with the right answer because God doesn't do that. God doesn't cause evil and pain and suffering. That's a byproduct of our choices. But I can't just go up to someone who believes these things and go, you're wrong. Because they don't want to believe what I believe, and I've just given them one more reason to not want to believe it. But now, what would happen if I could become all things to all men? What would happen if I could step back for a second and try to learn what they think? Try to understand what their understanding is. As incorrect as it might be, what if I did my homework so that I could talk to them, so that I could communicate effectively to people between each other? I might actually get somewhere. But as long as I go up to the atheist and say, yeah, you're wrong because Genesis 1:1 says this, I may be right, but I guarantee you that person will not be one of the ones I'll save. because I didn't communicate and help that person understand, starting with where they are.
Of course, this is more God do these things. He allows them though. So God allows it. So that's the secondary argument after him causing bad things to happen.
Right. Well, it is true he does not. It is true he does not cause bad things to happen, but it is also true that he allows those bad things to happen. To not allow them would remove our freedom to choose, our free moral agency. So, who else got a question? I've been talking a lot. Yes, ma'am. How do I explain it? Well, I would even argue that disease is a result of sin. Why? Because no disease existed in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, something I'm going to talk about Wednesday night, so yeah, you're just getting the foreshadowing. So, but why did Adam and Eve get kicked out of the Garden of Eden? Yeah, but they could have just lived in the garden with their sin. Why did they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden? Bingo. There's two trees, and I mentioned this the other night, but just as a prelude. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the tree they weren't supposed to eat of. They ate it. Adam and Eve ate it. There's another tree, the tree of life. And the reason Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, this place where there was no disease, there was no illness, there was no physical death, was because they had access still to the tree of life, which allowed them to eat and live forever. Do you realize God, I'm going to say the same thing Wednesday night. Just somebody quote me, record it, and then I'll just stop talking and you can play this part Wednesday night. You understand that God never intended for human beings to die? I'm not talking spiritually either. I'm talking physically as well. He never intended us to die. What does sickness do? Causes death. Certainly causes pain, but it often causes death. I mean, my wife has an illness. My wife has a disease, Lou Gehrig's disease. And what's that going to do? It's going to ultimately rob her of her life. The reason that I understand that and I don't try to balk at it is because all of the evidence we have demonstrates that with the medicine that we have right now. People say, well, don't you have faith in God? Of course I have faith in God. I also have faith in God that God will operate the way God chooses to operate. I don't have the right to redefine how God works. He does that, I accept it by faith. Well, they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden because of the tree of life. And so when they were removed from the tree of life, death occurred. It may have been 900 years before it did, but, because Adam lived to be 939 years old, I believe. But the point is, death came and comes to all men. And death will come to all men unless Christ comes first. Yes, sir. It was an apple. I've seen the pictures. No, we do not know. Right. Right. Very good, very good. Okay, second bell rang, but I just want you to look up here. Okay? That's the whole PowerPoint. You want to take a picture of it, I'll leave it up here, you take a picture of it. But here's the point. Whether it's science we're talking about, a false religion that we're talking about, atheism that we're talking about, understand that most people in the world have a Bible. because there's something that almost everybody believes in. If you want to talk to them about Jesus, if they happen to believe in a Bible that wants to listen to you, and maybe they grew up in a religious background and they realize they don't know that much and they'd love for you to, oh, I love those moments. But not everybody's like that. That doesn't mean, oh, you're an atheist, well, I can't talk to you, and you guys are Mormons, I can't talk to you, and you guys are Seventh-day. You get it? No, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to all of you. But sometimes I need to learn how to talk to you if I want, ultimately, for you to be able to talk to God. Yes, sir. Very good. Very good. So I'm going to end with this. Do you know who the biggest fan of science is? God. Tell me why? He created it. So let me ask you something. Does God have anything to fear from good science? No. Does good science have anything to fear from God? No. And so the point is, what we have to do is we have to help people to learn good science. How does it work within the confines of God's creation? You get people talking like that, both communities will be on the same page, and that page is found in the Bible. Y'all have a good day.